Welcome to another video in this 6-part series in which I explain how to read research and nutrition headlines to know whether or not they are applicable to you. My name is Stephanie Dunn. I'm a registered dietitian and the founder of Feed Your Intention. I guide women to nourish their wellness and reclaim their wholeness. I hope that when you complete watching the 6-part series, that you will really feel informed about why nutrition research isn't quite as cut and dried as we'd like to think it is, and how you can use the information as you achieve your optimal health and well-being. So earlier I mentioned that sometimes the participants in the research group don't fit into the averages for the group that they are in. They don't respond the same way that the majority of the people do. Those people are called outliers, and I told you we would come to this in just a moment. So here we are. Depending on how the outcomes show up, meaning what the data of the outcomes is, these outliers can really throw off the results of a scientific study. Or, at a minimum, they make those of us who read the studies directly question if the results are as cut and dried as headlines would have us to believe. So I want to look at the outcome of an epidemiological study, and this means a study in which the researchers simply took the data from a group of people and analyzed it statistically. They don't actually intervene with the group at all. These are also sometimes called observational studies because the researchers are simply observing what happens to a group of people. So this study, which again is the link is at the bottom of the slide, is from 2021, and it was with a population of 30,600 people, and this was performed in the US. And the researchers were trying to determine how total cholesterol levels impact a person's risk of dying. Now, the graph on the left is for death due to any reason, and the graph on the right is related to death specifically from cardiovascular disease. Now, you can see that these are both kind of U-shaped. And what that means is that at the bottom of the U, that is the place, and the U being the black line. I'm going to explain what the gray is in just a minute because it obviously has a slightly different shape. But the black line is the average risk of dying. And so the bottom of that U is the place where you are least likely to die. The way you read this is that the numbers at the bottom of the graph show your total cholesterol level, show the total cholesterol levels that were recorded for the participants whose data was included in the study. Now, these units are for the US because they're in milligrams per deciliter, but I'll show you the European and Canadian equivalents in just a few slides. The numbers on the left, or going up and down the y-axis, show us what is the hazard ratio, meaning what is the risk of dying. Now notice that my arrows are pointing to the 3 on both graphs, and the reason I'm pointing that out is because that means the scale of this risk is slightly different between the two graphs. But briefly, the larger the hazard ratio, the more likely a person is to experience an outcome. So if the hazard ratio is 3.0, a person is more likely to die than if the hazard ratio is 2.0 or even 1.5. A hazard ratio of 1 means that a person is as likely to experience the outcome with or without the thing that is being measured. So in this case, we want to know, is a person more or less likely to die based on their total cholesterol level? If the number is 1 for any given cholesterol level, that means a person is just as likely to die with their cholesterol being that number versus staying alive, is what I mean by that. So let's get into a little more about what these graphs are telling us. So the bottom of the U, as I mentioned, is the place that you are least likely to die. Basically, where is that black line, that black U, closest to a hazard ratio of 1? Specifically, for any cause of death, that is what all-cause mortality means, is that it means that you died for absolutely any reason. Your risk is lowest between approximately 205 and 230 milligrams per deciliter, which is 5.3 to 6.0 millimoles per liter. And your risk of dying due to a cardiovascular disease, very specifically, is between approximately 180 to 210 milligrams per deciliter, which is 4.7 to 5.4 millimoles per liter. Now, there is a bit of overlap, as you can see, between these two, right? So between 205 and 210 milligrams per deciliter, or 5.3 to 5.4 millimoles per liter, you are the least likely to die from absolutely any cause whatsoever. But this section is supposed to be about outliers, so I want to point out one more thing. The gray area is what is known as the confidence interval. And what that means is, based on the population that was studied and using statistical analysis, the data shows that the researchers are 95% sure that the risk of dying falls somewhere in that gray area. So the black line is the most likely risk of dying, but depending on lots of other factors, we're going to talk about that in another section too, they are 95% sure that the risk is anywhere in this gray area. So if we look at the graph on the right with the death by cardiovascular disease, even at a much higher total cholesterol level, I mean, this goes up to like almost 500 milligrams per deciliter, there is still a chance that you won't die from cardiovascular disease. Now, of course, there's a higher chance that you will, as we can see here, right? This gray area goes up quite high. And this shows us that there were outliers in the studied population. So they took this average, which gave us the black line, but we can see from this very wide gray area that it's not a guarantee that you're going to die from cardiovascular disease, even if your total cholesterol is 400 milligrams per deciliter. Now, at higher levels of total cholesterol, and we're talking about over 210 milligrams per deciliter, other factors will play into whether or not you're going to die. That's what we can see by this really wide gray area. And it is possible that for a few people with higher cholesterol, they have less of a chance of dying from cardiovascular disease than if they had lower levels of total cholesterol. And we can see that right there. This gray section where the hazard ratio is less than 1 shows us that there is a chance that you are more likely to live with a total cholesterol level of 400 milligrams per deciliter than you are to die from it, because the hazard ratio of 1 means the risk is exactly the same. If the hazard ratio is greater than 1, it means the risk is greater that thing will occur, right? So at 400, if the hazard ratio is greater than 1, it means you are more likely to die than to live. You're more likely to die from cardiovascular disease than to live with your total cholesterol at, say, 400 milligrams per deciliter. But if the hazard ratio is less than 1, it means you're more likely to live than to die from cardiovascular disease at 400 milligrams per deciliter. Plus, at lower levels of total cholesterol, there is a higher chance that you will die from cardiovascular disease than if your total cholesterol is right around 200. And that's what we see right here. This black line starts to go back up, as does the majority of the gray area. That means that some people are at a greater risk of dying from cardiovascular disease when their total cholesterol is less than 180 milligrams per deciliter than when it is higher. I also want to add to this that the risk of dying from any cause increases significantly at lower levels of total cholesterol. So this study shows us that for the majority of people, the total cholesterol number that will reduce their risk of dying from cardiovascular disease, or any other cause for that matter, is just over 200 milligrams per deciliter, which is 5.3 millimoles per liter. But there are going to be people with significantly lower total cholesterol who will die from cardiovascular disease. And there will be people with higher total cholesterol who will not die from cardiovascular disease. And that is because we are all unique in terms of our actual bodies and genetics, but also our environment, our experiences, our emotional and mental health, things that are quite difficult to take into consideration in a research study. I hope you found the information in this video helpful. If it felt like it ended kind of abruptly, that's because when I recorded these videos, they were originally one long video and I decided that that was too much, so I cut them up into smaller videos. I hope you'll check out the other videos in this series so that you can have a really complete picture about the various aspects of nutrition research and how to read them, plus how to read the headlines that come from that research to know whether or not the information is applicable to you. So please check out the other videos in this series, and in the meantime, I wish you wellness and wholeness.